The Great Turkey Walk, Chapter 4. Nobody said anything about Jabez's status come morning, or hardly anything. We just got up with the birds and made ready to move on. In point of fact, it was Jabez who woke us up. "Ow!" he yelled. "Help! Help!" I rolled over in my blankets and cranked open an eye. There was Jabez, just a lying stiff as a corpse on the ground, with a plump tom turkey hovering over him, pecking at his hair with interest. "Shoo him away, Jabez," I muttered. "He don't mean no harm. Just never seen hair like yours before." "What is it?" With a sigh, I propped myself up. "Why, it's a turkey. A bronze turkey." I reached for a pebble and lobbed it over. The tom took off. Jabez sat up and looked around. "They's all over!" He near to screamed it, freezing up again. "Giant turkeys all over! In the trees! On the ground! I'm surrounded!" "Well, I hope to heaven you're surrounded. I hope to heaven they're all over. And I hope to heaven they keep their weight. Near to 30 pounds, some of them toms. You're looking at my meat and potatoes, Jabez. My future. These is my turkeys." Jabez shivered. That set me to thinking again. "Weren't you brought up on a farm? How is it you've never seen a turkey?" "Pigs," he said. "The master raised pigs. And a few laying hens. Pigs I could deal with any day. They don't creep up on a body this-a-ways." I finally got up to roll my blankets. "You want to trail along with this here business establishment, you got to learn to love turkeys, Jabez." He struggled out of the blanket I'd loaned him. "I love turkeys," he said. "I love 'em to pieces." But he tiptoed mighty carefully around the fresh batch pecking by his bare feet. A few hours into our morning exercise, I got to thinking about how Jabez done steeled himself to run away in the first place. However he could have managed it, that fellow was nothing but a bundle of nervous bones. Take the way he was walking left flank this very minute. I'd set him to that side so's he could watch Emmett at work and get some training from him, but he didn't seem to be picking up the way of it real fast. What he was doing was flapping his arms ever so often like a scarecrow. Of course, with his ragged shirt and pants flapping along with those skinny arms, the overall effect was to upset my birds. I watched him skitter a dozen or so into needless flight. Then I bit the bullet. "Jabez." "Yes'm, Mr. Simon." Least he'd gotten past the master part. Still and all, just Simon, Jabez. Simon, plain and pure. I ain't no older than you, howsomever I look at it. "Yes, sir, Simon." I shut my mouth. He was progressing. And it's not like he'd had all those years Miss Rogers had to learn my name down pat. "Come walk with me a piece, Jabez. We'll try us a new tack with our turkey training." "Yes, sir, Simon." He flapped on over. We got us to the other side of the town of Lynn that day, no thanks to Jabez Ballou. He watched my turkeys roost themselves in a heavy growth of oak and elm while I pondered over the situation, just standing there scratching my head. That fella had no feeling for birds whatsoever. He was willin' right enough, but he sure and certain wasn't able. Didn't look like a gift he would be blessed with either. I walked over to the wagon where Mr. Peace was ungearing the mules. "Hey, Simon," he said. "Hey, Mr. Peace." I tickled Sparky between the ribs. Sparky snorted and gave a little braying laugh. Mr. Peace tossed down a neck collar. "Your boy don't seem to have an aptitude for birds, Simon." "That's a fact. I tickled Sparky some more. "I was just worrying over it." "You could set him off on his own again. He was managing afore he found us." "Weren't managing. Was starving himself to an early grave, more like." "Ain't your place to feel responsible, son." Mr. Peace slung off another neck collar. "Ain't, but I do. Then again, he's got a mighty big appetite, and we only provisioned for 2. I don't begrudge him the food. Just wish I could put a finger on his talent. Miss Rogers always said as how there's a place for every soul in this world, only needs to be found." Mr. Peace started in leading Sparky to the stream we'd stopped next to. The turkeys had already availed themselves of it. It might have gone down an inch or 2 from their thirst, but there was still water enough left. "Where's Japheth now?" I turned back from my considerations of the stream to Mr. Peace. "Borrowed my knife and took himself off into the woods first thing we stopped." "Maybe he's figured the situation out for himself then. Maybe he's already taken off on his own." He wouldn't have left for good with my only knife, Mr. Peace. That I'm sure of." "Japheth didn't either. He poked out of them woods again about a half hour later, and he came with a peace offering." "I knowed I didn't do a real fine job for you today, Simon, sir." He handed me a passel of fresh stream trout, strung up on some wild grapevine. "But I'll do better tomorrow." I stared at the fish. Behind me, I could hear Mr. Peace trotting over right fast. "Where'd you get them trout, Japheth?" he asked. "In a little crick pool back in them woods." "How'd you get 'em?" I wondered aloud. "A body can fish that a ways? He oughtn't to be half starved to death the way you are." "Got 'em with your knife, of course." He wiped the blade on an intact square of his trousers and handed it back. "Tied it to a stick and just aimed." He passed the string along to Mr. Peace. "Didn't have no knife when I took off from the master. Never had me one of my own." I studied the knife in my hand, then slowly pulled its sheath from my belt. "Here." I handed them both over. "Why don't you just keep on borrowing it for a while? Forget about the turkeys. You're our new provisioner." "I am?" Japheth blinked, then made a little dance of pleasure in his bare feet. "I'll just head on back before I lose the light then. Give us a few more for breakfast. We can keep 'em fresh in that water yonder overnight." I turned to Mr. Peace, who was already squatting over the catch, cleaning it. He was whistling as he worked. He stopped to grin up at me. "Nothing like a mess of fresh trout to follow last night's bean pie. I do admire fresh trout. You reckon he can stay then?" "Long as he contributes, son. Long as he contributes." He set to with more gutting. "Speaking of which, why ain't you contribute some of them wild onions growing over the way, Simon? Pan-fried trout is mighty fine stuffed with wild onions." Japheth sure did take to my bowie knife. He polished it lovingly after supper, then set into whittling at a stick he'd fetched back with our breakfast fish. I watched him lazily, thinking about the last whittling I'd seen back in Union, the whittling on the porch of the general store that had found me Bidwell Peace. Japheth was whittling different, though, with more of a will. I watched some more, between fighting to keep my eyes from shutting. It suddenly hit me. "You making something, Japheth?" "What'd you expect?" he fired back. "Never seen nobody make something out of their whittling before." "What do you mean?" "I mean they just sort of whittles to see them little curls of wood spring up. The longer the curl, the better. Then they throws the stick away and starts out fresh on another. My mama never taught me to waste time like that. You whittle You whittled something useful." I sat up straighter, squinting through the dark. "So what is it you're making then?" "Just a minute now, and I'll show you." Jabez's long, slim fingers worked that knife like the finest tool. I studied its precision with interest. My Bowie knife had never done that kind of labor before. Finally, the blade stopped, flashing in the firelight. I glanced over to Mr. Peace to get his opinion. Too late. He was already beginning to snore atop his bedroll. A strange sound jerked my head back, a kind of haunting sound. Where'd that come from? That sound! Jabez took the stick from his mouth, and it stopped. From my flute. My jaw dropped down. "You just made you a musical instrument? In only a few minutes? And you can make it play, too?" Jabez flashed a smile. "Get me some solid hunks of wood, can make me a fiddle. I can make that sing, too." "Oh, my—" I remembered to shut my mouth. I guess Miss Rogers was correct, as usual. Who's Miss Rogers? Only the kindest, loveliest lady in this entire world. Like to meet her sometime. Ain't had too much experience with kind, lovely ladies. My mama aside. Jabez put that flute to his mouth again. This time the music that came forth sounded just like Miss Rogers. Graceful and twinkling and full of light and life. I lay back onto my own bedroll and shut my eyes. I didn't even bother to explain why Miss Rogers was right, as usual. She just naturally knew how to find the best in any poor soul. I drifted off to sleep, peaceful. End of chapter 4.